Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. I want to say that's so French. Lapointe. Vanessa Lapointe is a registered psychologist whose passion is in supporting parents and other big people to see the world through their child's eyes. She is a Huffington Post parenting blogger and author of the best-selling book, Discipline Without Damage. I think that might help answer that question up there. How to get your kids to behave without messing them up. I think it might be too late for me. As a mother of two, Dr. Vanessa strives not only professionally, but also personally to view the world through the child's eyes.
You know, one of the things that I think is the most valuable about wondering how children grow up in the best way is to really think about the interaction between what the child brings into the world and what the people around the child bring to the child as they grow. And so when I think about myself, I remember very fondly the stories that my parents have told me about what I was like as an infant right on up through my childhood. And both of my parents will tell the story now to anyone who will listen, that when I came out of the delivery room, there was a group of my parents' friends waiting in the hallway to meet me and say hello. And my parents are absolutely convinced that as I was brought out of the delivery room and presented to this group of people in the hallway, I flashed them my biggest, best grin. And here I am at 41 years of age, I think still routinely going through life with that big grin on my face and connecting with human beings in the work that I'm doing.
It's actually not like possible for a newborn infant to smile because you don't have the cognitive capacity to do that. But my parents are convinced that that's what's happened. And if you were to talk to them about that, they would not be at all surprised that I ended up in the profession that I did, doing the sorts of things that I do, connecting with human beings and sort of sharing that energy back and forth. One of the things that's come along with being a psychologist, and I've spent part of my career specializing in infant psychology, so working primarily with kids who are 6 and younger, is that I got to learn a lot about the brain and how the brain grows and how the brain develops and what science, contemporary science, has to offer us in terms of our understanding about what brains need so that children can grow in the best possible way. And so I'm sharing this slide with you to sort of illustrate some of what happens in the very young brain. And we have babies everywhere in the theater today. So you can imagine in the moment that they're sitting here in front of you, those little babies are growing 700 new neurons per second. That's like a gajillion, quadrillion, bazillion to the power of infinity neurons by the time you go home today, right? And so if we think about that, the neuroplasticity, or the brain's openness to external influence in the early years, especially for our very young children, is profound in a mind-blowing kind of way. And the upshot of that is that it means that the brain is profoundly open to wonderful influence when we can set the world up in a way that really resonates with what children respond to and what their brains love. It also means, on the flip side, that the brain is equally open to negative influence. As all of those neurons grow and the brain figures out what are the pathways that are important and what are we going to focus on as we continue to grow this human being. And so you can see by the time an infant reaches their second birthday, how much more densely populated the brain is in terms of neural connections, right? And it's not that so many new neurons are growing, although that's certainly part of it, but that the neurons that exist are branching out and they're sending out feelers to other neurons so that there's all this crossover in terms of connections, which is why when we're working with young children, there's a lot of overlap in terms of different developmental domains. And so as a psychologist, if I know that the emotional needs of a child haven't maybe been met, there's probably a good chance that there's going to be maybe some speech and language stuff happening and other things going on alongside that because of how the brain is growing. And then something really interesting happens. And you can see the ages here: birth, 6 years, and then 14 years. And what's happening as they get older, it's not that they're losing brain cells, although you might think that if you're parenting an adolescent. I have a 12-year-old son at home who's going to be 13 in a couple of months. I just bought him brand new school shoes, size 14. Yeah, they told me I need to special order the next pair, and they need 4 weeks notice. So I'm starting to live this a little bit, but it's not that they've lost neurons, it's that the brain is becoming now specialized, okay? And so when they were younger, there was this prolific growth, which is awesome because it gives them a lot of potential and a lot of possibility. But as they get into the teen years, what's happening is the brain is starting to figure it out, and it's getting really smart, and it's knowing what to prune out because it's not needed anymore. And so think about the opportunities that kids have for things like learning self-control and learning regulation, so that when they have a meltdown or they're frustrated about something and we respond to them with compassion and we respond to them with empathy, we show their brain how to be fired up and how to calm down. And if that gets practiced, like, I don't know, 57 times before bedtime tonight, if that gets practiced really regularly, guess what's getting saved when the brain goes through its pruning stage? All of that good stuff, right? Psychologists like to talk about this as serve and return. And so it's like reciprocal communication. The child sends a bit out, and you respond in kind. And how you respond has a profound impact on how that brain is going to grow and develop over the years. And so then we think about, well, what does it take then to get into a brain of a child and grow it up in a way that's going to really work, that's going to resonate, that's going to be what nature intended? And so science has given us an answer to this as well. And if we were to sort of do a poll of everybody in this room and ask them the question of the children that you are here representing today, what do you dream of for them? So if you think about when they're 37 years old, what do you want life to be like for them? And if we were to sort of collate all your answers and take a look at all of those answers, probably what we would find is that most of you would say things like, I dream of my child becoming a 37-year-old who's happy. I dream of my child becoming a 37-year-old who can be engaged in deep and meaningful relationships with other human beings. We are a social species by design, and we need that connectivity with other people in order to really feel fulfilled, right? I dream for my child when they are 37 that they will be a contributing member of the world that we live in. I dream for my child when they are 37 that they will be successful in whatever way you're defining success. So if we think about all of those dreams, and that these are the dreams universally we hold as parents for our children, and then we wonder, well, how do you grow a brain that's going to do that, right? So like, what's the trick to that? There was an article published in a very prominent journal about 11 years ago now that sort of set the research world on fire in terms of our understanding of how you do that. And that this water bottle is rounded on the bottom. And I see your computer sitting there.
I got it. I'm here for you.
I can feel it. I feel it all around. So if we think about how we're going to grow that brain, we're going to grow that brain based on what science has told us. And this amazing article that came out about 11 years ago, it set the world on fire in terms of child development and what we know about brains and how they grow in the best possible way. And basically, the bottom line was that it was a research study looking at children who had been maltreated, had been brought into foster care, and were placed in what they called treatment homes. They were homes where the foster parents had been brilliantly trained in the art of loving children. So they were attachment-focused foster parents who knew how to regulate, who knew how to respond, who knew how to structure days and make them feel safe, all of those kinds of lovely things. And what they found is that when incubating in that kind of an environment and marinating in that kind of compassion-based care, those kids' brains changed profoundly. The way they measured it was by looking at their signs of stress, the level of cortisol that was floating through their veins, which is toxic to the growing brain. So we need to get in and underneath that for kids that are struggling that way. And that was what had spurred this study on. And so what they found is that if you can love on kids, that actually reverses the effect of that. And it's getting down into the regulatory core of the brain and wiring it up in a way that really works for kids. Wiring it up in a way that's going to grow them to become that 37-year-old who's happy and successful, able to engage in meaningful relationships, able to give back to the world. Guess how long it took for them to rewire those brains? 3 months. Which is crazy and so amazing in terms of what the developing brain is capable of, right? And so if you can do that, you can get to a child's heart, you can get to their brain, you can fill them up with all of this amazing goodness that literally will get laid down in their neural track and become physically a part of how their brain is shaped, and thus how their soul and their self develops, right? So that's cool. And it's with all of that kind of knowledge that I came into my own journey as a mother. And I think sometimes when you think about, oh, well, she's a child psychologist and she has 2 kids and they must be really awesome kids. They are. They must be perfect. They must do really well at school. They probably never fight with one another. They probably never backtalk to their mom. They've probably never had a tantrum, right? You'd think about all of those kinds of things. And I'll tell you, when my kids were young and I'd be at the playground, there was no faster way to clear that playground than to answer honestly the question, so what do you do for work? You just don't tell people. You don't tell them that you're a child psychologist because you will have no play dates and nobody will ever invite you over for dinner. They all think you're psycho. You also, when you're on an airplane and you're stuck beside people, you do not tell them. You don't tell them what you do because then it's free therapy for the 5-hour flight to Toronto. So the thing is, it's a little bit of an occupational hazard to come into motherhood with the weight of all of this information bearing down on you, right? Because now I know, like every day when I wake up, I know that if I get to be like yelly shouty mom at my kids, like I just affected some neurons, right? And I know that. And I have no excuse around it because then I go to my office and people pay me like a lot of money on an hourly basis to tell them why it's really important not to be yelly shouty and all those kinds of things. And then they go shopping at Save-On on the weekend if they happen to live in South Surrey where I live, and they see that it's my kid in aisle 5 having the meltdown because I won't buy the blue Kool-Aid, right? And so that's a little bit of a challenge. And I think that sometimes people believe that everything's sunshine and roses in my house because I'm a child psychologist. You might have the misbelief that this is what my life always looks like. Those are my boys. That was a couple years ago now, in this like pastoral setting with perfectly filtered light, right? We went home after that to the home-cooked meal that I had prepped in no. We probably stopped at McDonald's or somewhere fast food on the way home. This is not the reality of my world. And for anybody who knows me, personally, and if you've been to a workshop of mine before, you will have heard stories. If you happen to be a client of mine, you will know that I share very freely my own journey as a mother, because the point is, it's not actually supposed to be perfect. That's not childhood, and that's not what grows brains in the best possible way. It's the ups and downs and the ins and outs and the interesting parts of life that allow us to have opportunity to kind of flow into our children's lives and do for their brains what is needed. And so with all of that information, you might think that I would have thought long and hard about taking our youngest son to Disneyland when he was 5. You know, they talk about dandelion children and orchid children. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression, with dandelion children being kids that kind of just like roll with the punches and they're pretty robust that way. And then there's orchid children who are intensely sensitive, often kind of like too bright for their own good, but are beautiful and do amazing things. So my youngest son is an orchid child. And he's beautiful and he does amazing things and he's so interesting. Disneyland for an orchid child is not the happiest place on earth. it is like this like overwhelming, intense exposure to way too much stuff all at once. And so by the end of the first day, we didn't know it at the time, but he had developed a migraine. The other thing that we learned at the end of the first day was we're exiting, at the end of the day, everybody has to like file out of the park. So you're in this line and it's kind of dark. And he's got this migraine, he's very unwell. And so he threw up in the lineup. And Disneyland has a code V, they call it. They called it code V. People like came up out of the ground. They form a vomit circle around the vomit. They have a water thing that they spray, and then the suction thing, and it's like 37 seconds later, it's gone. It's all disappeared. But this is us. We spent, does this have, yeah. We spent the whole next day in the hotel room, ordering room service. This is us after the pumpkin patch when I just couldn't deal with the fighting anymore, and so we had stopped for ice cream. This is us look at their faces here. So this is in New York City, the beginning of August, this past summer. They were not getting along so well, and we were riding the subway, which is like you descend into the depths of hell. It's so hot, and it smells terrible, and there's a million people, and everybody was miserable, and they were miserable with each other. And so we had a little photo to capture for time and all eternity how awesome the trip to New York was. So you get it's not sunshine and roses. I am the first person to admit that I am a hot mess on many a day and many a moment in my home. It is not perfect, and it doesn't need to be perfect. And as I've sat through all of the other speakers today, I've been like, oh, but that's my talk. Oh, but that's my talk. Hold on, that's my talk. Because I think that's probably a resonating theme with many of us as moms and parents, is that we feel like it has to be. And because we are in the information age where we have access to so much of this knowledge, and we can Google stuff, and we can look it all up, and we can read books, really great books. We can do all these kinds of things, but we're overwhelmed by all of that information. And so what I wanted to do in terms of leaving you with something that I hope will resonate and feel valuable to you today is to just sort of cook it down to 3. And in cooking it down to 3, they're not really things that you're going to go home and do. They're just things that you're going to think about as you continue to journey on in your role as moms. And so the first of these is to think about what it means to be good enough. And in the developmental literature, when we look at what children need, and we know that they need an emotional relationship with at least one caring adult to grow up in the way that nature intended. We know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, it is a basic human need for all children, all humans, everywhere. And so knowing that, of course, the pressure is on for this amazing relationship to grow and develop and blossom. But if you look at the literature, we've come up with this phrase, good enough. You only actually need to be the good enough mother, the good enough parent. And in fact, scientists have gone so far as to quantify what does good enough mean. And if you were to look at interactions, so if we can sit in a room with a mother and her child and actually code their interactions. I'm not doing that right now to any of you. So if you have babies here, like I'm off the clock. I'm not doing that right now. But we can code their interactions, and we can get a flavor of the relationship and a flavor of what's going on and how it's all looking. And when we look into this, we see that for children who have what we call secure relationships or secure attachment relationships with their caregivers, they're actually only rock solid, 100% attuned between parent and child 30% of the time. That's it, guys. 3-0 and go, right? 30% wins. The rest of the time, you're falling out of connection. You're working your way back into connection. Whoop, you fell out of connection again. You're going to spend most of your journey over here. There's only going to be about 30% when it's all going really well, 30% where you've got your game on and it's really feeling solid and working out well. And so I think if we can just sort of refocus on what does it mean to be a good parent, a good mom? What does it mean to really grow and build and nurture that relationship with your littles? It means 30%. And the rest of the time you must be generous and gracious with yourselves around how it's all looking and feeling. Number 2, if I were to tell you what is the one question that I get asked most often as a child psychologist, it starts like this. What do I do when? What do I do when my kid hits his brother? What do I do when my child's melting down at the grocery store because I won't buy them the Kool-Aid in aisle 5? What do I do when my child backtalks to me? What do I do when my kid ignores his curfew? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And the thing is, we're kind of asking the wrong question. The wrong question is not what should you do. That's the wrong question. The question shouldn't be what should you do. The question actually needs to become, how should I be? And so if I were to use this as an example, let's say you go home tonight, and I hope this doesn't happen to any of you, but let's say you go home tonight and your doorbell rings at like 8:30, and on the other side of your door is your best friend in tears, sobbing inconsolably. Do you need to phone a psychologist and ask them what you should do? Right? You don't. You would be compelled by instinct because you're a social species by design. You would immediately fling that door open. You would throw your arms around your friend or however it is that you're comfortable consoling another human being who's obviously in distress, and you would take it on, right? You wouldn't need me to write you a to-do list like step 1, step over the threshold. Step 2, open your arms wide. Step 3, close them gently and then more firmly for 7 seconds. You wouldn't need that. Why? Because it would come out from inside of you. You would have that there. Same for your child who's melting down in the grocery store. Same for your child who's become frustrated with being a little brother or a big brother, and so is lashing out of anger or upset. You have to have that seed down inside of you and just be and allow it to come out of you and to flavor and inform your interactions from there. And don't get bogged down in the how do I do this, right? We can spend so much of our time trying to perfect that when really we just need to erase all of it, sit with who we are in here, and be for our children what human beings need to be for each other. And then third and finally is to honor the soul. And I think sometimes in all of this we miss the fact that we have souls too, right? We're very intent and focused on growing up our children. And as I was talking about just being, we need to honor their souls as part of that. But you have a soul as well. And inside you, and as part of your soul, is your inner child. In there lives your experiences of your childhood and what that was flavored like and what that looked like. And you've now taken on the form of an adult who's now loving on another little human being. And what's inside of you is going to flavor that. And it's going to come out and become part of the relationship. And so honor that and look to yourself and understand first if you have some awakening to do with your inner child. Hang with me, it's not group hug time. I think people get worried sometimes that it's going to get too psychodynamic. But you have to say hello to that, and you have to honor that, and you have to know that it's real. Similarly, adult temperament. If you're a really shy mom, that's okay. You don't have to become this magically gregarious social mom that does all of these play dates and interacts all the time with other parents if that's not honoring your soul, because that's going to deplete you and empty you. And so think about, how do you honor your soul as much as how do you honor the souls of your children? How do you respond to them in kind? How do you have them experience you as the kind of big person who gets them? The kind of big person who has their back, the kind of big person who's picking up what they're putting down, and as a result of understanding them to the depths of their soul, that you're altering your way of being, that you're responding to them in kind, that you're working to set their world up in a way that you know is going to resonate with their needs as their own unique individual souls and human beings. And so let's do away with the to-dos. Let's do away with the magic lists of how we're going to get this done. And let's just bring it back to the reality that we are human beings. We are a social species by design. When you've heard other little babies in here start to fuss, today. And you know how some of you will turn around and you'll start, you know why you're doing that? Because you're wired. You actually are compelled to ensure that that little baby's being taken care of, right? The reason people complain about infants crying on airplanes is because we are compelled to make sure infants are okay. And when they're crying and they're not our infant and we have no control over that and we can't fix it, it makes us really uncomfortable. And so then we complain and don't want to be seated near them. Not we, as the mom tribe, but the world out there. And so the idea is that we are a social species by design. You do not need anybody to tell you how to do this with your children. You just need to sit within the core of who you are as a human being and let that come out of you. And so if I can leave you with one parting statement, it is that I have a profound belief in all of you because you are human beings who are mothering children. You've got this.
We have Q&A.
Yeah, awesome, yeah.